Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Hello, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to be one of the participants in this conference. Thanks, Mr. Muhammad. Thanks for all of you. I'm Haytham Safwat, and I'd like to introduce myself. That by the end of the day, I'm English language teacher and instructor. Today, we are going to discuss together the title of our paper, or the title of the slides is School Administrative Employees Perceptions of English for Specific Purposes. And this lecture is prepared by Haytham Safwat and Amr Slim. Maybe something wrong. Just a minute. Okay. So the objectives of our lecture today is what is ESP? When and why did it start? What are the advantages of ESP? What are the types of ESP? And what are the course steps of the ESP? And finally, given the example by the title of our research paper, which is School Administrative Employees' Perceptions of English for Specific Purposes. Before we start, I'd like to do this task with all of you. All what we are going to do, we are going to listen to a text, then we are going to read the questions to answer them. But before listening to the text, I prefer for all of you to read the three questions before the listening task. So you have 1 minute to read the questions before the listening task. Okay, are you ready? Let's start to listen to this text, then you will tell me your answers in the chat box.
Once upon a time, there was a land called Learningia, where children dreamt of becoming chefs, astronauts, artists, and more. But there was a giant wall blocking their path, made of strange words and confusing structures and more. This wall was called English Land, and it seemed impossible to climb over. Then, a brave knight named ESP arrived. Unlike other knights, ESP didn't carry a sword. Instead, he had a magic toolbox filled with special English used by chefs, astronauts, and artists. With ESP's help, the children in Learningia learned the secret language of cooking, the countdown codes of space travel, and the colorful words of art. Suddenly, the giant wall of English didn't seem so scary anymore. Now, the children could climb over it with confidence, ready to chase their dreams in their own unique way. So, are you ready to join ESP on an adventure and unlock the magic of English for your own dreams? Let's go.
So let's go, and after listening to the text and before, as you have finished reading the questions, I'm waiting for your answers in the chat box. You have only 1 minute to give me your response. Okay, very nice. Yes, you're right. Now let's check our answers together. So the answers, number 1, the name of the land is Lingria. Number 2, the answer is letter C, English. And number 3, letter A, ESP. After this introduction, I'd like to ask a question from your information. What is ESP? If you know, please write for me your answer. Okay, English for special purposes is okay. Okay, for specific, yes. Fair enough, thank you. Let's start this slide by asking a question. Why do we learn English and why we teach the language of English in our schools, our institutes, colleges, universities, and so on? Why gives us and leads to a reason we teach our students, our learners, the language for a reason. He likes to be a pilot, engineer, chef, and whatever. So this person needs the language. Why? For a reason. Now we have a specific reason. So this man or this girl needs the language for a specific reason. We have a second question. What kind of language this man or this lady needs? If he is a pilot, if he is a doctor or she is a nurse, he needs the language of the situations. What I mean, text and context. He needs, for example, if he is a tour guide, he needs the language to tell the tourists while using the speaking skill the famous monuments, temples, and so on. Now we have to answer. We have why, so we have a purpose. We have what kind of language. It's already for a purpose. And finally, we have how. How here means for English language teachers, the methodology. How can we teach English for specific purposes to this candidate? We have here a quote. Tell me what you need English for, and I'll tell you the English that you need. Now we need to make a definition, and you can guess from the used pictures what is the definition of the English for specific purposes or ESP. ESP is what? Is a tailored approach which is focuses on or focusing on the four language skills reading, writing, listening, and speaking. In what? In a specific domain, in a field, if you are a doctor, if she is a nurse, and whatever. Now, we have a third slide. When and why did ESP start? The ESP started, and before answering this question is asked by many scholars, many candidates, many participants, because some people think that English for specific purposes started the last 20 years only. No, definitely no. English for specific purposes started during the Second World War, 1954. Many soldiers were captured by the enemies, as we know that after any war we have winners and we have losers. So, losers, their soldiers, were captured by the enemies, and they were asked by using English language about many information. Already they will never tell any secret information, but they need to use the language to tell the simple information as their names, from where, and so on. Then we have a graph of English for specific purposes, especially for science and technology. Then the language of English between, or what I mean English for specific purposes, between 50s and 60s, the linguistic revolution, which started to happen with many theories and many waves, and concentrated on motivation. And what we mean here by motivation is concentrating on the learners themselves. They need the language for a purpose. And now we are language teachers, English language teachers in international schools. Students need the language for a purpose. Also, we cannot forget the oil crisis which happened in 1970, and when America and European countries sent for searching to extract oil, we needed this kind of or approaches of the language English for specific purposes. And for many nowadays, for many international schools, universities, and so on, we have many learners who are learning the language, maybe inside different international systems, IB, Canadian, American, and so on. And we have many students and many Arab learners who travel to study at any approach at any college outside of their countries, and they needed the language for their academics and whatever. What I want to explain and assure here that we have increased on the movement of or the approach of English for specific purposes. Now we need to ask ourselves a question. Why English for specific purposes and not English for general purposes? Number one, English for specific purposes is tailored for specific group of people who are working or studying, and they need the language for a purpose. They needed to use this language to focus on their academics and on their fields and careers. Also, using English for specific purposes. Imagine that you are going to make an interview at any school, at any university, or he is an engineer, for example. Using the language during the interview is one of the merits which will be appreciated by the HR at this company or at this school. So we need English for specific purposes, for more in-depth communication. Also, English for specific purposes doesn't cost money and it never wastes time because we are not going to teach this learner or this candidate the language since his childhood. We do this at our schools. This is English for specific purposes and English for general purposes. Strevens, 1988, summarizes the advantages of English for specific purposes with the following points. Number one, being focused on the learner's needs and it wastes no time. Number two, it's tailored to the learner field, profession, and interest. Number three, it doesn't waste your money. And finally, it is successful in the academics or your profession as a worker or an employee at this company or whatever. Let's move to a next slide. The next slide is ESP. ESP takes the learners from a known point to be in a known point, while English for general purposes is the opposite. Just a reminder here about EFL, English as a foreign language. Learn in non-English speaking countries. Learn for academics or for personal reasons. Also, less practice outside classes. And finally, many of learners learn broad academic skills. After that, we have one of the most important classifications in the history of English language teaching. Let's concentrate here. We have this tree and this tree for language teaching by Waters and Hudson. We can look here and see that language teaching is including English language teaching, which is divided into English as a second language and English as a foreign language. Let's focus on English or EFL, English as a foreign language here, which is including ESP, English for specific purposes. And this also can be divided into English for science and technology, which is known as EST, English for business and economics, which is known as EPE, and also we have English for social sciences, which is known as ESS. English for specific purposes is a big umbrella. Umbrella for what? For English for academics and English for occupational purposes. And if we are going to look at the tree, we have at the final of the tree, English for medical studies, English for teaching and for economics, for secretaries, for psychology, and so on. So by the end, English for specific purposes is what we need whenever we study at our colleges or taking courses and so on, or when we work in a specific field. Now, ESP course steps. When we design a course in English for specific purposes, number one, we need to know the needs, the desires of our learners. Then we have to select our materials and develop all the materials. Then we have a third step, which is delivering the information. And finally, or before the end, we have the assessment and the feedback, which is very important in English for specific purposes because after the feedback, we have to look again to our materials and developing information and delivering them and so on. Needs analysis. Needs analysis is the process of identifying and describing the needs of the learners and the context for which they need to learn English. We use needs analysis. Why we use them? Because English for specific purposes is mainly focused on the needs of the learners. We have to know some information before designing our course. For example, we can use questionnaires similar to surveys, and this can happen before the course to know many useful and different information before preparing any English for specific purposes course. And if we have time, we can use the interviews, whatever interviews or semi-structured interview questions and observations. But as we know that academics and employees who are working in different places are always busy and their time schedules are busy. And tests, which is one of the very important tools that can measure the level of what? The level of the candidates, because we have to know and the candidate, he has to know his level of English to join English for specific purposes course. Finally, needs analysis data can be analyzed to design our materials and our course. Our example, school administrative employees perceptions for English or in English for specific purposes. Let's have this simple introduction. ESP, or English for specific purposes, aims to link what? To link English education to what? To learners' communicative needs through two things. Number one, needs analysis. Number two, material evaluation. And for the materials, some materials are already prepared. Some materials needs supporting materials. Some materials we do it from the scratch. In this paper, we have two research questions, and this paper is already finished and under publication. Question number one, research question number one. What are the perceived challenges with referring English for specific purposes that affects the performance of private schools administrators? And the second question, which is how can private schools administrative staff overcome and have solutions to these challenges according to their perceptions? The findings of this research paper, we concluded the challenges in this figure. Number one, communication. Some employees needed the English for a specific purpose. They needed it to communicate, for example, with parents who are foreigners, or they have strong background about English language and they insist on using it in the workplace when they ask, for example, about their sons, kids, and so on. Others complained about documentation. They faced many problems while documenting, for example, a certificate, or when we have any organization that is doing its part of its task in the school, and they need the documents written in English. Also, CPD or continuous professional development, which is leading to image, and we have personal image, which is related to the one himself, how he is looking at his English language at his workplace, and we have professional or academic one, which is related to the workplace itself. And finally, some complain about the discrimination, or maybe they are going to lose their jobs as they cannot deal with English language, which is mainly we need it for the school as an admin. And the findings or the solutions on the tongue of the same persons, they suggested that Number one, school can ask English department at any school is already having many professional teachers. So why not those teachers are trying to help their colleagues and try to give them what they need in English language related to the workplace. Also, we have some learning resources. Some asked the administrators to provide them with any learning resource to be in in the school library or even online, and they will study together in their work groups. But at the same time, they asked the school to measure the levels of English language. Also, we have staff performance evaluation, which is already asked by many candidates in this research paper. They needed the school to evaluate their level of English language using, for example, any contracts between the school and any outside institute or any respectable place which is delivering this kind of services, or maybe inside the school. The school can provide the teachers by many things like this. Also, we have many language activities, which is encouraging the candidates or the employees to use the language. They asked for more online language programs or applications under the supervision of the school. So they expressed their need for English for a specific purpose. By the end or the conclusion of this research paper, the study explores the challenges faced by administrative employees in one of the language schools and suggests decision makers should encourage and support the use of English for specific purposes, which is known as ESP, while also adjusting international laws and principles. It was the final conclusion of this research paper. After I finished, I'd like to do the acknowledgement, helped in collecting data. Farida Sameh, she is head of department at Trial International School. And we have Walid Abdul Majid, he is English instructor at Talaa Islamic Language School, and he is a freelancer. Second eye on the PowerPoint presentation, Muhammad Abdul Aziz, he is an educational consultant at Modern House for publishing. And my big thanks to the conference manager, Mr. Muhammad Nabil. This presentation is prepared by Haytham Safwat and Amr Slim. And we have some of the resources and the references related to our lecture. Thank you very much.